And here we go. Watership Down audio book, adult audio book, adult commentary, episode 8. The Crossing. Dun-dun-dun. The Crossing. All right. It says here, the Acts of the Apostates, chapter 27. The centurion commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea to get to land. And the rest, some on boards, some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it comes to pass that they escaped, all safe to land. Act of the Apostates, chapter 27. Apostles. Acts of the Apostles, chapter 27. Must be, what, from the Bible or something?
Yeah.
Okay, well, this guy's a Jesus screamer, Bible thumper. He knows, yeah, pretty much. Anyway, we're going to get on with this. They don't want to listen to your Bible stuff. All right. The top of the sandy bank was good 6 feet above the water. From where they sat, the rabbits could look straight ahead upstream and downstream to their left. Evidently, there was nesting holes in the sheer face below them. For as the light grew, they saw 3 or 4 martens dart out over the stream and away from the fields, away into the fields beyond. In a short time, one returned with his beak full, and they could hear the nesting squeaking as he flew out of sight beneath their feet. The bank did not extend far in either direction. Upstream, it sloped down to a grassy path between the trees and the water. This followed the line of the river, which ran straight from almost as far away as they can see, flowing smoothly without fords, gravel shallows, or plank bridges. Immediately below them lay a wide pool, and here the water was almost still. Away to their left, the bank sloped down again into a clumps of adler, among which the stream could be heard chattering over gravel. There was a glimpse of barbed wire stretched across the water, and they guessed that this must surround a cattle wade, like the one in the little brook near the home warren. Hazel looked at the path upstream. "There's grass down there," he said. "Let's go and feed." They scrambled down the bank and set to nibbling beside the water. Between them, the stream itself stood half-grown of clumps of purple loosestrife and fleabane, which would not flower for nearly 2 months yet. The only blooms were the few early mallows feet and a patch of pink butterbur. Looking back at the face of the bank, they could see that it was in fact dotted thickly with marten holes. There was a narrow foreshore at the foot of the little cliff, and this was littered with rubbish of the colony. Sticks, droppings, feathers, a broken egg, and a dead nestling or two. The martens were now coming and going in numbers over the water. Hazel moved close to Fiber and quietly edged them away from the others, feeding as they went. When they were a little way off, and half concealed by a patch of reeds, he said, "Are you sure we are going to cross the river, Fiber? Why don't we just go along the bank one way or another?" "No, we need to cross the river, Hazel, so that we can get into the fields and beyond them too. I know what we ought to be looking for. A high, lonely place with dry soil, where rabbits can see and hear all around and men hardly come. Wouldn't that be worth the journey?" "Yes, of course it would. But is there such a place?" "Not near the river. I need to tell you that. But if you cross the river, you're going to start going up again, don't you? We ought to be on top. On the top and in the open." "But Fiber, I think they may refuse to go on much further. And then again, you say all this, and yet you say you're too tired to swim." "I can rest, Hazel, but Pipkin's far better bad way. I think he's injured. We may have to stay here half the day." "Well, let's go talk to the others. And they may not mind staying. It's the crossing not going to fancy, unless something frightens them into it." As soon as they made their way back, Bigwig came across to them from the bushes at the edge of the path. "Uh-oh. I was wondering where you two got to," he said to Hazel. "Are you ready to move on?" "No, I'm not," answered Hazel firmly. "I think we ought to stay until Nell Frith. And that will give everyone a chance to rest, and we can swim across to those fields." Bigwig was about to reply, but Blackberry spoke first. "Bigwig," he said, "why don't you swim over now, and then go into the field and have a look around? Wood may not stretch very far in one way or another, and you can see from there, and then we might know which would be the best way to go." "Oh, well," said Bigwig rather grudgingly, suppose there's some sense in that. I'll swim the Ember River as many times as you like. I'm always glad to oblige." Wow.
Yeah, sarcastic.
Sarcastic. What a dick. "You want me to swim it? I'll swim the goddamn river as many times as you like."
You lazy fuck.
Yeah, pretty much. Without the slightest hesitation, he took 2 hops to the water, waded in, swam across the deep, still pool. They watched him pull himself out the other side, beside a flowering clump of figwort. Gripping one of the tough stems with his teeth, shake a shower of drops out of his fur and scatter into the alder bushes. A moment later, between the nut trees, they could see him running off to the field. "I'm glad he's with us," says Hazel to Silver. Again, he thought wearily of the Thirera. "He's a fellow that would find out all we know. Oh, I say, look, he's coming back already." Bigwig raced back, crossed the field, looking more agitated than he had at the time since the encounter with Captain Holly. He ran into the water almost headlong and paddled over first, leaving an arrowhead ripple on the calm brown surface. He was speaking as he jerked himself out of the sandy foreshore. "Well, Hazel, if I were you, I surely wouldn't wait until 9 Frith. I should go now, in fact, I think, if you have to." "Why?" There's a large dog loose in the wood. Hazel startled. What? He said. How do you know? When you get into the field, you can see the wood sloping down the river. Parts of it is open. I saw a dog crossing a clearing. It was trailing a chain, so it must have broken loose. It must be on the Lindray's scent. But the Lindray will be underground by now. So why don't you think what will happen when it picks up our scent? Running one side of the wood to the other with dew on it. Come on, let's get over quickly. Hazel felt at a loss. In front of him stood Bigwig, sodding wet, undaunted, single-minded, the very picture of decision. At his shoulder was Fiber, silent and twitching, of course. He saw Blackberry watching him intently, waiting for his lead and disregard Bigwig's. Then he looked at Pipkin, huddled in the fold of the sand, more panic-stricken and helpless than any rabbit he's ever seen. At this moment, up the wood, there broke out an exciting yip-yip-yippee, and a jay began to scold. Hazel spoke, though kind of a light-headed trance. Well, you better get on then, he said, and anyone else who wants to. Personally, I'm going to wait around till Fiber and Pipkin are fit to tackle it. You silly fucking blockhead, cried Bigwig. We're all finished. Don't stamp about, said Hazel. You might be heard. What are you suggesting then? Suggest? There's no suggesting to be done. Those who can swim, swim. The others will just have to stay here and hope for the best. The dog may not come. Jesus Christ. I'm afraid that won't do for me. I got Pipkin into this, and I'm going to get him out. Well, you didn't get Fiber into it, did you? He got you into it, says Bigwig. And, of course, Bigwig's lost his temper.
Oh, yeah.
So he's ranting and raving. He's like, you're a dick, and what the hell, dude? We got dogs in the woods. Hazel could not help noticing, with reluctance and admiration, although Bigwood has lost his temper, he was apparently in no hurry on his own account and seemed less frightened than any of them. Looking around for Blackberry, he saw that he had left them and was up at the top of a pool where a narrow beach tailed away in the gravel pit. His paws was half buried in the wet gravel when he was nosing at something larger and flat on the waterline. It looked like a piece of wood. Blackberry, he said, can you come back here a moment? Blackberry looked up, tugged out of his paws, and ran back. Hazel, he said quickly, there's a piece of flat wood, like the piece that was closed the gap in the green loose above the warren. Do you remember? It must have drifted down the river. So it floats. We can put Fiver and Pipkin on it and make it float again. It might go across the river. Can you understand? Hazel had no idea what he meant. Blackberry's flood of apparent nonsense only seemed to draw tighter the mesh of danger and bewilderment. Although Bigwig's angry impatience, Pipkin's terror, and the approaching dog were not enough to contend with. The cleverest rabbit amongst them has apparently gone out of his mind, and he felt close to despair. Frithra! Yes, I see, said an excited voice in his ear. It was Fiber. Quick, Hazel! Don't wait! Come on! Bring Pipkin! It was Blackberry who bullied the stupefied Pipkin to his feet and forced him to limp a few yards to the gravel pit. The piece of wood was hardly bigger than a large rhubarb leaf and was slightly aground. Blackberry almost drove Pipkin onto it with his claws. Pipkin crouched shivering, and Hazel followed him on the board. "Who's strong?" said Blackberry. "Bigwig, Silver, push it out." No one obeyed him. They all squatted puzzled and uncertain. Blackberry buried his nose in the gravel under the landward edge of the board and raised it, pushing. The board tipped. Pipkin squealed and Fiber lowered his head and sprayed his claws. Then the board righted itself again and drifted out a few feet into the pool where the two rabbits hunched on it, rigid and motionless. It rotated slowly till they find themselves staring back at their comrades. "Frith of Inlay," said Dandelion. "They're sitting on water. Why don't they sink?" "They're sitting on the wood, and the wood floats. Can't you see?" says Blackberry. "Now we can swim over ourselves. Can we start, Hazel?" During the last few minutes, Hazel has been as near to losing his head as he ever came. He had been at his wit's end, and with no reply to Bigwig's scornful impatience, except for his readiness to risk his own life in the company with Fiber and Pipkin, he still could not understand what had happened. And at least he realized that Blackberry wanted him to show authority. His head cleared. "Swim! Everybody swim," he said. And he watched them as they went in. Dandelion swam as well as he ran, swiftly and easily. Silver, too, was strong. The others paddled and scrambled over somehow, and they began to reach the other side. Hazel plunged and plucked and plunged. The cold water penetrated his fur almost at once. His breath came short as his head went under, and he could hear faint grating of gravel along the bottom. He paddled across awkwardly, his head tilted high out of the water, and made for the figwort. As he pulled himself out, he looked around amongst the sobbing rabbits and the alders. "Where's Bigwig?" "Behind you," answered Blackberry with his teeth chattering. Bigwig was still in the water, on the other side of the pool. He had swum to the raft, put his head against it, and was pushing it forward with heavy thrusts of his back legs. "Keep still," Hazel heard him say in a quick, gulping voice. Then he sank. But a moment later he came up again and had thrust his head over the back of the board. As he kicked and struggled, it tilted, and then, while the rabbits watched on the bank, it moved slowly across the pool and grounded on the other side. Fiber pushed Pipkin onto the stones, and Bigwig waded out beside them, shivering and breathless. "I got the idea once Blackberry had shown us," he said. "But it's hard to push it when you're in the water. I hope it's not long to sunrise. I'm cold. Let's get on." There was no sign of the dog as they made haste through the elders and ran up the field to the first hedgerow. Most of them had not understood Blackberry's discovery of the raft and once forgot it. Fiber, however, came over to Blackberry, was lying at the stem of the blackthorn in the hedge. "You saved Pipkin and me, didn't you?" he said. I don't think Pipkin got any idea what really happened, but I have." I admit it's a good idea," replied Blackberry. "Let's remember it. It might come in handy again sometime." That is the end of Chapter 8 of Watership Down, adult audio book by me, and then occasionally you hear the grumpy guy in the background. Are there anything you'd like to add to this little read about?
The way Bigwood's turning out, he should get his own Rambo bandana.
Well, that's what his fur head, his cap is all about. Maybe they could trim it down and make it into a bandana.
But I could picture Sylvester Stallone as Bigwood.
Well, Bigwood caught on pretty well, I have to admit. He's not completely stupid. Blackberry, very obviously, is very clever. Very, very smart for a rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
And Fiber caught on real quick. Everybody else is kind of like, what happened here? Anyway, so these guys are pretty damn pissed off, and now they're safe. And they know for a fact now that the saddled Ford Owsla is no longer on their tails. So, what other adventures lie for Hazel and crew?